Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today. Today, we're diving into a challenge that affects nearly every organization, making sense of their unstructured data. A common pattern is that unstructured data gets ignored until it becomes painful. You can keep buying storage for a while, but eventually it turns into a workflow problem, wasted time, wrong files, delays, and rising risk. Today's conversation breaks down how organizations move from kicking the can down the road to managing data with a purpose. My name is Josh, and today I'll be joined by Paul Honrud and Olivier Rivard. Paul is a veteran within the field of data management with more than 35 years of experience. He was the founder of Data Frameworks, which was acquired by Dell EMC, and now he serves as the Chief Product Officer at Diskover Data. Olivier is a product leader and entrepreneur in the data management field. He founded Data Intel after seeing the need for better visibility into unstructured data, and after its acquisition, he went on to lead product initiatives focused on modern data management solutions. He's currently VP of Product at Diskover. In this interview, we'll cover what has changed in unstructured data, what hasn't, and what it actually takes to manage data at scale in the age of AI. I hope you enjoy this interview. Thank you, Paul, for joining me today. I want to start with a two-part question. To begin, you've been working with unstructured data and file management for decades. What challenges have stayed surprisingly consistent over time, and how has the very definition of data management evolved over time?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Well, I'll start with, if you're not doing any data management, then you tend to look for, show me all the stuff that's over 3 years old. Some industries have been well ahead of the curve on data management as they keep data flowing through their data pipeline. So they're actually using data management to efficiently run a data pipeline. So I would say there's been some industries that have adopted it early out of necessity because they had to manage their production schedules and then all the resources associated with their production schedules. And then there have been other industries that their approach to data management was buy more storage. And eventually that exasperates the problem. Right? If you just kick the can down the road, it ultimately shows up as a workflow problem. So you're wasting people's time and you're delivering the wrong files and that. So, but I would say over time, more of the industry is realizing that data is an asset. It's intellectual property, and it needs to be more considered. There need to be additional vectors in addressing the problem. To more efficiently run your business.
Out of curiosity, so we're saying that a lot of people have been pushing this problem by buying more storage, but once they start tackling this problem, it's not a one-time solution, right? It's something that is recurring. It's a shift on how people manage their data. What's your vision on this? What's your take on this?
Yeah, so I have an analogy. It is a lifestyle. Good data hygiene, good data management is a lifestyle, like a good diet, right? And so if you don't want to go on a diet, you eventually go on a crash diet. So you buy more storage, or you just, right? And then pretty soon you say, I need to right size because I'm spending too much on storage and I can't account for where it is, right? And so it's sort of a, first step is a panic cleanup. That's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, a healthy data life cycle or data management helps you more efficiently run your business and know where all your, I would say, high value intellectual property assets are.
Yeah, totally. I love that framing. So with that in mind, let's bring it to Diskover. When storage vendors talk about data management, it often means tiering and cost optimization. How does Diskover approach unstructured data differently?
Well, I would maybe rephrase it to traditional data vendors, but
Right.
storage vendors, at the end of the day, they're a storage vendor and their revenue is driven by selling more storage, right? Let's not ever lose sight of that. Now, because that will happen just because the data that is being captured is at much higher resolution. There's more capture devices. So the storage is going to be consumed. Like nobody's going to buy less storage next year than they bought this year. All right. But the storage vendor tends to take what I would say is a age of data approach, and let's tier the data. Let's not necessarily think about what data we need or why we need it or the value of the data. Let's just try to cost optimize the placement of it based on when was the last time it was accessed. But it's a very low intelligent approach, right? You see there's no business vectors coming in. It doesn't have the customer or what chip design project it's associated with. It doesn't bring in any sort of business vectors that help you really run your business better by understanding your data. So the data vendors have shifted, and a lot of them focus on aggregating structured data. Obviously, structured data used to be in a database, and now it's often being pushed towards a data lake. And so the unstructured data has been the tougher one to solve. And unstructured is more than just PDF files. If you think of a Microsoft Office, right, that's a fairly integrated suite of things that create files that can be shared amongst them. In these production workflows, you may have vendors, you may have data being created from a variety of vendors, and sometimes they're competitors, right? And so there's not a lot of industry momentum for the competitors to work together to make their files shareable. Over time, that's evolved, but in the past, the vendors would actually try to do the contrary. They would try to not make the files shareable, hold them hostage into their application so they can maintain more of a footprint. The industry's pushed back on that and come up with common file formats that make it more shareable, but you still need to introduce some best practices into how you manage that data. So how does Diskover handle that differently? All right. So if you think about one of Diskover's taglines is to structure the unstructured data. But really what you're doing is you're adding structure to unstructured data. So structured data might come from a scheduling system, right? Or an order management system. This data is associated with this customer and it's located in all of these locations. So with Diskover, you want to look at a file or folder on your file system, and you want to know what customer it's associated with. So you might be adding additional metadata or properties to that file or folder so you can get some business context to it. All right. So by marrying structured data with unstructured data, you can really start to introduce some precision into your data management. All right. So why does that make Diskover different? Well, the backend architecture of Diskover is designed to keep adding metadata to objects. So I could add metadata about the storage system. I could add metadata about the customer. I could add metadata about the information coming from the header of the file. Is it signed? Is it not signed? All of that gets you a much clearer picture of your data, why it's there. Do I need it? What is the status of my data?
I want to add on this. I have a question related to specifically traditional storage vendors. We see they're building more and more data platform, data solution on top of their existing storage systems. But they're doing this in assumption that customers will only use their storage globally. From your experience with talking with a lot of customers over the years, what's the ratio of customers that are using only one vendor internally for their unstructured data?
I would say the ratio is as close to zero as can be. And I'll back it up. There used to be the promise of a single namespace, or we'll go with a big cluster file system, and then I just have one mount point. But you never walk in and just see one file system. I remember walking into a shop just not that long ago, 10 years ago, had a clustered file system, but they had 110 of them. And there's a reason people section off the mount points and don't ever put everything under one namespace. So I'm going to go, well, number one is vendor resiliency and recovery. Like if that namespace gets corrupt, that's a big deal, right? If I section it off, I can limit out my risk and recoverability. So roll that forward. There was another iteration of people trying to do that with big clustered file systems, SAN file systems. That was the promise. And now the promise is, can we get everything into one storage system? Obviously, the storage vendors want that. But the customers maybe not necessarily. It gives you zero vendor resiliency. And you'll see this right now, where a lot of customers that have an on-prem unstructured storage system are making a replication copy into the cloud. And so they've got vendor resiliency in the event of a disaster. Sometimes they'll replicate vendor to vendor, if it makes sense. But I think that's going to be a tough challenge. The second thing that comes into play is you'll often pick different storage for different phases of the workflow, right? So I may want a capture device out in the field, right? That is either capturing seismic data or camera data or whatever. So the data is being captured out in the field. Well, that's not going to be a giant SAN. It may not even be the same vendor. The data is then transferred from the capture location back to the mothership. And that mothership needs different types of characteristics on the storage. So it ultimately comes to workflow and aligning the storage to the needs of the workflow. And I just personally haven't seen one vendor that handles it all. I'll elaborate a little bit more. There's a big push to try to produce movies in the cloud. Let's go to the cloud, right? But the latency for sound, you can never really sync the sound to the picture predictably because of the sound latency. So you get 60% of your workflow in the cloud, but the sound still stays on-prem. So that's what I mean by aligning the storage to what has to happen in the workflow. And I just haven't seen one vendor cover the spectrum of it. It would be like one application covering the spectrum of any given workflow. It's very, very difficult.
I mean, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just to shift the focus a little bit, do you have like a favorite example of a customer outcome that illustrates the impact of what we were talking about, more data visibility and orchestration?
Yeah, let's put it on a spectrum of customers. Okay, from the spectrum of customers is their approach to their evolution or maturity of data management is very, very low. And the other end of the spectrum is their maturation process around data management is very, very high. Okay, so let's take the very, very low. I have a bunch of storage that's filling up. I can't get anybody to clean up. What data is here? What do I need? All right, so that one is fairly straightforward. I think the customer had 16 petabytes of data, and we came in and we analyzed. The workflow will actually leave ephemeral files there. They'll leave temporary files that are used in the processing, but they don't necessarily come back and clean them up. Debug files would be a good example. Like a debug file is used as you're running simulations on jobs. You debug the process and you actually get a working design. And then those debug files are really no longer relevant. And I think we found something like 2 petabytes of the debug files just by highlighting them, right? Because your workflow leaves fingerprints all over your storage. So just by marrying the workflow to the type of data that it generates, you can show them quick wins for cleanup. On the other end of the spectrum, let's say you're trying to process jobs. You have a 4-hour time window. You have lots of folks involved in it. So you want to do maybe some QC on the files before they come in. And things that would QC would be like an emoji in the file name. It's going to break the workflow immediately. So we want to fix that type of stuff as fast as possible so we don't delay file-based deliveries. There's also a security risk. There's people in that production process that need visibility, but they don't actually need access to the files. So on the other end of the spectrum, you'll see requirements for Diskover much more in tune with maximizing revenue profitability and shortening delivery timeframes, and also shortening the exceptions that come up that could delay deliveries. So I would say there's two ends of the spectrum there, and then there's people in the middle, right? It's a journey to constantly improving your data lifestyle.
Yeah, totally. That spectrum is definitely helpful. And looking ahead a little bit, as customers mature into an ongoing data lifestyle, where do you see the biggest opportunities in unstructured data management over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think there's two things that Olivier's is squarely in Olivier's crosshairs. So I will broaden the category, or I'll break it down into two categories. And if your files could talk, what would they tell you, right? They might tell you like you've got a bunch of risk here because somebody's storing clear text password files. You probably have a terabyte sitting over here in this trash can that you could probably clean up. So if your files could talk, so just taking an inventory of your files and your files telling you what needs to be done, right? Based on that inventory. So you can use that index of your files. It provides a digital footprint really of your workflow. So presenting to users where the inefficiencies are in their workflow is one thing. And you can use natural language for that because a lot of files and folder names are based on natural language. The second part, which Olivier is, I think, one of the pioneers in this space, is be able to ask your data about your data. Right? So I want to have a natural language conversation with my data. I may want to generate dashboards or results from that. And Olivier has been doing a tremendous amount of pioneering work. He's also doing a great job of marrying, old world with new world. So is my data, my interface with my data going to be solely chat, or is it going to be chat combined with contextual awareness? So your traditional file browsers type navigation. I'm really excited about the work he's doing there.
What excites you about the product roadmap and where Diskover's headed?
This is a really good question. So I think first, if you want to build something, you have to start with a good foundation, right? So can't build a 3 or 4 story house on a dirt foundation. Diskover has a rock solid foundation based on the back end architecture, the openness of it, the extensibility of it. So that builds the foundation to continually add business context so that if your files could talk, they could talk in a business context. If you're asking your data about your data, you can ask questions that combine unstructured data with business and produce relevant answers. That I think that is very exciting. The second thing that's very exciting is tackling these problems at scale, right? So scale is a multidimensional problem. So scale could be just the number of files that you have. Scale could be the rate of turnover. I'm producing 100 terabytes a day, right? So scale could be the rate of turnover of your data. And I just see that increasing with just the number of capture devices. Just think of how the iPhone has changed the ability to capture data. This is proliferating across across the whole unstructured data footprint. Scale in terms of volumes and locations, right? I may have 11,000 Windows shares to run a big pharmaceutical company. That's another problem from an operational point of view. How do I discover all these? How do I present all of these? How do I group all of these in a relevant fashion? How do I provide security around these? So operational scale is another tough problem to solve, right? So not just file count, rate of turnover, but the operational scale as to business units coming and going, projects coming and going, volumes coming and going is another really challenging aspect of the problem. And I think we're squarely positioned to tackle all of those.
And from all this data that we generate, and from my experience, even I generate a lot more data today than a year ago by using those LLM solutions. We can think about reports, prototype, different stuff that I can generate. Do you see end users leveraging only LLM, or they will still use traditional file system in the future? And do you think that the Diskover platform will be a key element to have a catalog of everything you have globally?
So I'll start with this. I think having a catalog of everything you have globally is a key element. You can even think about that personally, Josh. Like, can you find a picture from your cousin's wedding in 2007? Right? You're looking for this picture that had your cousin and your sister in it. Was that on your iPhone? Did you put that in Dropbox? Like, where did you put that thing? So you can think of that just on a personal problem. The second part of the question, I think, is what I would hover around contextual awareness. Sometimes it's not just sufficient to get a list of all the files. You need to see it more of in a family tree. Like, how is this group of files related to that group of files? So the contextual awareness, I think, will keep file managers and file browsers around a while. And if you go to any sort of data vendor or storage vendor, Dropbox or S3 browser or Windows Explorer, Finder on the Mac, there's always a navigational aspect to your data. So I think those aren't going to be gone tomorrow. Maybe in a younger generation. My daughter tends to find everything by search, but you can't rely on search alone. And I'll talk about why you can't rely on search alone. You need to have predictable locations as to where something lives and what it might be called for automation purposes, right? I know that the incoming sources for this customer has the pristine copy of this file. I need to take that. So I need to know where to go to grab it, to move it in the next stage of the workflow. And it's really difficult to get contextual awareness with search alone. In automation, they call it the bin picker problem. And I don't know if you've sort of heard this, but if you think about automation and a robot moving something down a production line, the robot needs to know XYZ coordinates as to where something lives, right? So it can pick it up and move it to the next station. The hardest problem for a robot is the bin picker problem. When you took it off of the production line and you just threw it in a basket, because now the robot needs to pick it up. It needs to figure out the orientation. Do I have it upside down? Do I have it sideways? How did I grab that? It needs to reorient the data, put it in a location where it can go next. So you can't just blow away contextual awareness or XYZ coordinates. So some degree of organization to your data needs to be there if you're going to facilitate automation.
So structure and predictability are what make automation possible. How do you see unstructured data shaping what types of AI projects succeed or fail?
This answer might surprise you because it's a old problem back in vogue. So for AI or any problem, you're only as good as the data you put into it, right? Garbage in, garbage out. which means I need to have a full view of my data. I need to have a way to enrich it, to then ultimately curate it. These are the files that I want to deliver somewhere. And the deliver somewhere might be to my model, right? It might be to an archive. It might be to a cleanup engine. So the problem of inventory, enrich, curate to my desired data product or data catalog is not a new problem. What's brought it back in vogue is AI. People are realizing that I need to go through that process to deliver the right data to the models for better results. So I think it's a age-old problem coming in heavily in vogue quickly.
And building on that, what are some first practical steps enterprises should take now to make sure that their data is truly AI ready?
I think step one is you need to know what you have. Like if you don't have an inventory of everything you have, how can you even possibly go to what would step two be? So an inventory of everything you have is step one, and then you weed out what you want and what you don't want. So getting an inventory of what you have, trying to introduce some discipline. And if you think about it, software is best practices codified. So what is your what is your discipline, right? So in an old paper-based world, you wouldn't just throw all your papers on the conference room table. And then if Josh needed to find something, he would just go in the conference room table and shuffle through this haystack. You eventually put a filing clerk in the middle of that. And now it becomes predictable of where that data may live and where I might find it to know it's there. Again, search also doesn't solve that problem, right? Because with search, you have to invoke what you're searching for. I have to know something might exist to search on it, right? And I might even have to know what it's called, right? I could search on engine and maybe miss a bunch of stuff that's called motor, right? So search does not always solve that problem because it requires a priori knowledge. I have to know something might exist to search on it. And the converse of that problem is to bubble up what exists. So start with an inventory. Start with how you would introduce best practices if you were doing that manually, and then AI just helps accelerate that. Olivier, you want any expansion upon that?
No, I think it's a good I think having a catalog of everything you have should be the initial step, not only for AI, but just to have a data management process in place. and sometimes people are not aware that they should do that, or that type of solution exists on the market. And for me, I don't understand how organization are not looking for that type of solution to actually build any AI pipeline internally. If you have a massive amount of unstructured data, how can you get the most out of it without an actual catalog? I don't get how people can tackle this problem by manually selecting file and navigating a file system. I don't understand how they do it right now. And it's potentially the reason why a lot of enterprise AI initiative are not working. It's because it's complex. It takes a lot of time to just figure out the data they need to start the project.
Yeah. I think the easiest AI initiative where you control the capture device, right? The capture device could be a cash register, right? There's no unstructured data there, right? Yeah. It's a controlled capture device. There's probably a limited number of them, and you can start the process and roll through it from there. A capture device is a website like Amazon.com. That's a portal where you're capturing every interaction. So those are, I wouldn't say easy, but easier problems. The challenge comes when the number of capture devices is many. There's no coordination amongst the vendors of the capture devices. The problems get a lot harder.
Yeah.
Paul, Olivier, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate both of you sharing your perspectives on where unstructured data management is headed and what Diskover is doing to build towards that future. So thank you for your time and thank you for sharing everything that you know.
Thank you, Josh.
Okay.